We're following developing news right now as tensions heat up in the Middle East. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says he's taking extra steps to keep New Yorkers safe. U.S. troops fired tear gas at pro-Iran protesters Wednesday after militant demonstrators stormed the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad Tuesday. Mayor de Blasio is at City Hall with NYPD Police Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner right now. Let's listen in.
Are safe. I want to talk about what I think has changed, but first, I want to affirm something based on 6 years of working closely, not just with the NYPD, but with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the FBI, our federal partners, our state partners. The level of unity and focus and professionalism and coordination between all of the agencies that keep us safe is at the highest it's ever been. And even though we are going to confront, I believe, some new and very profound challenges, I start with real confidence in everyone who protects us and their ability to work together to do that. That being said, I think it's really important for New Yorkers to understand that we are now potentially facing a threat that's different and greater than anything we have faced previously. Over the last 20 years, this city, more than any other, has suffered the results of terrorism. But the terrorism inflicted upon us came from non-state actors, came from very dangerous terrorist movements and individuals. As of last night, we are dealing with a different reality. And I said it last night. We're in, at this point, a de facto state of war between the United States of America and Iran. None of us knows how this will play out. It will likely take weeks and months, maybe even years before we see where all this goes. But we have never confronted in recent decades the reality of a war with a government of a large country with an international terror network at its behest. And no one has to be reminded that New York City is the #1 terror target in the United States. So we have to recognize that this creates a whole series of dangerous possibilities for our city. I'm not saying this to be alarmist. I'm not saying this because I assume any outcome. I'm saying this because New Yorkers deserve to know that we've entered into a different reality, and we have to be ready. I have absolute faith in the NYPD, which has built up its own extraordinary intelligence gathering capacity and extraordinary ability to protect us from terror, and has been watching the actions of Iran and its proxies for many, many years. There's a tremendous amount of information, as you'll hear in a moment from Deputy Commissioner Miller, a tremendous amount of information we already have on the activities of Iran and its allies. So we will be prepared to protect New Yorkers. But I want all New Yorkers to know that the idea of each and every person playing a role takes on added meaning right now. Again, we're dealing with an adversary that we have never confronted previously on this scale. And that fundamental notion, if you see something, say something. If you see something, say something, it takes on even greater meaning now. And we have plenty of examples of New Yorkers heroically stepping forward and informing the police of something they saw or heard that ended up saving many lives. We need people to be thinking that way right now. Before I turn to the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, I'll say there's no way to predict what happens next, and it's probably unlikely that we feel the effects in the immediate term. But my fear is not just about the immediate term, it's about what happens in the months and even the years ahead, and the fact that we need to stay in a state of constant vigilance. So there will not be a moment where we let down our guard, particularly where the potential of hostilities with such a dangerous adversary exists. Again, everyone should be aware, everyone should be vigilant, everyone should feel it is their responsibility to join with the NYPD to help make sure we're all safe. But in the meantime, New Yorkers should do what we always do in the face of adversity. Just continue to go about our lives unafraid, aware, always realistic, tough. New Yorkers are the most worldly wise people there are. So the fact that we face a new threat cannot and should not change people's lives. It should simply make us more vigilant and aware that we're all in this together. With that, I turn to Commissioner Shea.
Morning, everyone. To reiterate, there are no specific credible threats to New York City at this time, and it's worth mentioning that. I will say this is what the NYPD does, though, on a daily basis. Monitor the threat stream, track unfolding events around the world in real time. We do this because what happens in Baghdad, what happens in Tehran, what happens in Tel Aviv, London, or France can and does affect us here in America, and certainly affect us in New York City. We did this before yesterday, target hardening critical structures. We did it last week, we did it last month, we did it last year, and we'll certainly continue to do it going forward. So with our counterterrorism and intelligence bureaus, our joint terrorism task force partners, and with all of our law enforcement, state, local, and federal partners, we'll continue to detect, work to prevent any acts of violence before it occurs. That is what we do, the men and women of the New York City Police Department, and they do a great job of doing it. So what you will see going forward in New York City in the wake of the news overnight is that heightened vigilance in terms of uniformed officers, many with long guns, at sensitive areas, critical structures, and of course, continuing ongoing dialogue with our community leaders who may be affected by this and upon seeing it. As always, we ask New Yorkers to remain vigilant, and anything at all out of the ordinary, 888 New York City Safe, please call. John?
So let me just start where everybody else started, which is we have no specific credible threat emanating from the actions undertaken yesterday regarding New York City. But we live in a complex threat environment in our day-to-day normal. So we're coming off the heightened deployments of the holiday season, which is part of the normal. Separate from that, we have, aside from terrorism, a series of hate incidents, anti-Semitic incidents in certain neighborhoods around the city, which we have also deployed against. In this case, we have an international incident that can and likely will have global implications. And as the commissioner said, any incident on that level will have a ripple effect that is felt in New York City. We didn't start thinking about this last night. This is something we've studied over a number of years. It entails a number of specific investigations and arrests that have occurred so that we're aware that New York is a top terrorist target. We're aware that people have looked and probed for targets here before, and we are lucky to be the city that has the most significant investment, an investment that's been increased under this administration in our counterterrorism resources, whether that's the money we spend on it or the sheer number of people we dedicate to it. So the message to New Yorkers, of course, is to go on about your daily lives, go do the things that you intend to do, but as you see security out there, particularly NYPD personnel at different locations, just factor in. We also ask the public for a heightened awareness. As the commissioner said, if you see something, say something. We talk about suspicious activity, whether that's someone trying to elicit information in an unusual way about the security at a different location, whether that's the testing or probing of security or access at a location, whether that's a government location, critical infrastructure, symbolic target, suspicious photography, observation, surveillance. We really depend on people because they know what's normal on their street, on their block, in the neighborhood where they go to work every day, to use their instincts and to not be shy about calling.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Miller. And just to emphasize, again, we called everyone here together because we have plenty of knowledge of previous efforts by Iranian proxies to scout and target locations in New York City. Hezbollah and others have made it a point over the years, and it's been identified, disrupted, and been talked about publicly. So I'm not divulging anything that has not already been said, but I'm reminding people. We know there's been an effort to target and prepare to attack New York City in the past. That gives us a tremendous amount of insight into the kinds of dangers we may face, but also gives us the ability to prepare to defend against any such attack. So again, no credible and specific threat at this point in time, but a very different environment this morning than anything we've experienced previously, and one that we need to be ready to deal with for the long haul. Turn to your questions on this topic. Yes.
Blasio, this morning you mentioned your concerns about this airstrike without the approval of Congress. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, this is, look, I want to start by saying I personally am very happy that Soleimani is dead. He was a terrorist who used his abilities to harm not only American soldiers and to kill American soldiers, but to kill countless thousands around the world, innocent human beings. A horrible human being. I'm glad he's gone. But we also have to put in perspective what it would mean if the shoe were on the other foot. If our defense secretary, one of the most prominent political figures in this country, was killed by the Iranian government, no one would doubt that we'd be out of state of war. So we have to assume that this action puts us in a de facto state of war, and that can only be done under the laws of the United States of America and under our Constitution. That can only be decided by the U.S. Congress acting on the will of the people. I think the American people have sent a message in election after election that they want to end all these wars. And now we're talking about the potential of going into a war much greater than anything we've confronted. This is not Iraq. This is not Panama. This is something much, much more dangerous. Simple point. We should not go to war with Iran. It's extremely dangerous for the American people. Not only our men and women in uniform, all of us. The American people do not want a war with Iran. And nothing can happen without the approval of Congress. This has to be brought to the Congress immediately.
Yes. What will New Yorkers physically see that's different? Will there be more, obviously, uniform patrols? Will there be bag checks on the subway? What's going to change?
I'll start and turn to the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner. Again, what I hope people understand is we have never experienced this before. In the last few decades, when we've dealt with international terrorism, we have not confronted a state actor. It's just a world of difference. ISIS, horrendous. Al-Qaeda, horrendous. They did not have a country and a formal military backing them, and a very highly organized international network supported by a government. There's nothing like this. So we're going to take whatever steps we need to protect New Yorkers. And I think people should understand the NYPD is always ready to do things that will disrupt terror. So sometimes when you see a sudden deployment, it's to deter potential attack. Or when you see those bag checks, they may feel out of the ordinary, but that's because we're dealing with a very different environment.
I'll begin, and then I'll pass it to John, Juliet. The good news here, if there is any, is that this didn't occur yesterday afternoon into the evening, and then we started putting plans together. This is something that has been in the making, if you will, in terms of deployments at strategic locations, particularly with Iran. So what New Yorkers will see, as far as the details, I'll let John describe into it. But again, it's going to take all New Yorkers getting involved. I think the key here is John hit it well when he said that you know what's normal on your block, in your business, if you're a night watchman, if you're somebody on your block. When that hair goes up on the back of your head that something feels out of the ordinary, you're right. And 888 New York City Safe, let a cop know. But in terms of the deployments, we have originated locations throughout New York City that are already in the works. I can tell you that by yesterday evening, I was on the phone, as with the mayor and John, with federal and local authorities coordinating this response. John?
So I think rather than give a list of where, a lot of the locations that are considered top potential targets are already covered. I think you'll see some strategic shifting around, and that'll be intelligence driven. Other than that, I think the commissioner summed it up very well.
Will subways? Will there be stops on bridges or tunnels?
Look, I'm only going to make a couple of common sense points, and then, again, my colleagues can add to it. What we have to assume, based on previous knowledge, is that the Iranians would have an interest in prominent targets, well-known American locations. So we'll obviously keep special watch over those. We also know that deterrence is achieved by being unpredictable. So if we think bag checks are necessary, we'll do bag checks. Whatever it's going to take, we're going to always respect people's rights and liberties. But the best way to deal with an adversary like this is to keep them off guard and be able to move our assets agilely and change our strategies as needed. Yeah.
For Mr. Miller, if you could tell us, so a lot of analysts have said their assessment is with Iran's calls for revenge, that it's probably overseas and not here. Do you share that assessment sitting in the chair you sit in? And Mr. Mayor, for you, you talk about deterrence. What if something, a proxy was to attempt something in here? Maybe it's a question for national leaders, but what message do you have for Iran if any of their actors were going to try anything here in New York?
So I think that the more likely response in the near term would be overseas, where Iran has in place proxies in places like Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, and others. That makes sense, but we can't rely on that as New York City. We have to protect New York City in the context that we understand our target profile.
Look, Iran for years and years has gone too far. Let's be clear where the original sin is here. But my message is, if they were ever to attempt directly or indirectly an attack on New York City, they would be bringing horrible, horrible results to their own people. This is why it's so important, and why, again, I believe the Congress must act immediately. Every possible effort should be made to avoid a full-scale war. But clearly, an action against American soil would make that kind of war inevitable. And everyone would lose. And we're not talking days, we're not talking weeks, we're talking years and years of war because of the way Iran is structured with not only its own military, but with its terrorist allies all over the globe. This is something we've never confronted previously. We have to understand that. But no, we're going to do everything that we are able to do to keep New Yorkers safe, and that's a lot. I'm very, very confident in the NYPD and our federal partners. But I would be even more confident that we could keep New Yorkers safe if we could stop this march to war. Yeah.
For Commissioner Miller, given what this, the undertaking that you now have in place, was the counterterrorism community given a heads up about the strike? Should it have been? And I wonder if, also given, as you mentioned, what's been going on in the city with the response to different hate crimes and what we know about Iran proxies, are the targets of interest one and the same?
We were reached out to very early on through the Joint Terrorism Task Force to advise us of the strike and the potential targets to start moving things into place. As has been said multiple times here, though, we have thought of this scenario in advance and multiple different versions of it, so those plans were ready to go.
And again, to your other question, as I said, we can't presume, but we know historically Iran and its proxies have been interested in the most prominent, internationally known locations in New York City.
To that point, Mr. Mayor and Deputy Commissioner Miller, you had a recent case here, Ali Karani, just sentenced to 40 years in prison, a case that you developed through the JTTF. To the extent that you can speak about it, what type of cases have you developed over the years? What have you seen, and what makes Hezbollah and Iran unique in some of those regards?
I think the mayor pointed out that they are not merely a terrorist group, but Iran in particular is the leading state sponsor of terrorism. That means that you have terrorism, which is unconventional warfare, carried out through proxies with the backing in terms of organizational capability, pre-operational capability, and financing of a state behind it. So when you look at the Ali Karani case, this was literally an Iranian sleeper agent through its proxy Hezbollah, who was on the ground here in New York for years with specialized training in weapons and explosives, surveillance, counter-surveillance, and target assessment. He was arrested in June of 2017 with Samir Eldebek, who had similar training through Hezbollah. And then a year following that, the arrest of Alexei Saab in September of 2019 showed us that there was a redundancy capability of a second sleeper agent who was looking at similar high-profile targets. So as we have pointed out from this table, that this is not a scenario we started thinking about last night. We are well prepared to counter this. This is neither a scenario that Iran started thinking about last night or its proxies. If you look at its historical use of proxy in targeted terrorist attacks, not just on the battlefield in places like Syria, you see the plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C. by contracting it out to Los Zetas, a vicious Mexican drug gang. You see the attempt to attack the U.S. Embassy and assassinate the U.S. ambassador in places like Azerbaijan by contacting local organized crime entities and attempting to hire them out as proxies. So with Iran, you see a state sponsor that has organized proxies such as Hezbollah and other militias that then sub out to third proxies. It's a very complex field. It's why we've studied it so long in such detail, and it's why through the FBI, JTTF, working with NYPD intelligence, we've had a marked success in New York in identifying these sleeper agents and rolling them up. I think that's very significant because that's a setback in terms of what they collected on and targeted being exposed to their handlers.
I want to just add to this, it's really important for people to understand. Think of every war we've been in. We have never, ever dealt with an adversary that had this particular capacity. When we were attacked on 9/11, was by al-Qaeda that had bases in Afghanistan, but the Afghani government had very, very limited capacity. Think about the other attacks that we have suffered or been suffered in this country, again, by terrorist movements and organizations. This is a full-blown government of a major modern nation. And by the way, many of its military leadership were trained by the Soviet Union and then by Russia. Soleimani himself was trained by Russia. You're talking about some of the most sophisticated military capacity on earth, and the nation that was our central adversary for decades trained the military of this country that we now may be facing. I'm not saying that to underestimate the power of the United States and our military. Our military is the finest in the world. I'm trying to express that we're dealing with a different reality and one that we've never experienced before because it will not be expressed in conventional terms. This is the point about, and John can speak to it much better than me, the asymmetrical warfare concept. You're talking about a nation with a government and a huge military that then works with highly organized terrorist organizations around the world that they sponsor, fund, and provide arms to, and then subcontracts with other local criminal organizations. We've never dealt with this before, and we should be very sober about that fact. Yeah.
For Commissioner Miller, just to clarify,